Okay, I think we're good to go. All right. So, hey everyone. So, thanks for joining. This is exciting because this is the very first time we're doing the Independent Centers Book Club. So I'm here with Laura Forkham, who's president, and Jenna, who works with Rebuild Congress, and we'll give a chance for everyone to kind of introduce themselves here in a minute. But as about me, I'm the content strategist for the Independent Center. And at the Independent Center, what we like to say is that we're in the business of building a home for the politically homeless, which is why we picked this book, Belonging by Geoffrey Cohen. So, a psychology book, which, from our understanding, and we'll dive more into this, kind of talks about the political homelessness of the American electorate is really kind of a fundamental understanding and crisis of belonging. So the discussion that will follow, I think, is really going to be exciting, and we'll touch on lots of different stuff about how we can bridge political divides, maybe foster the sense of belonging, and cultivate positive situations for everyday Americans. And I'll pass it off to you, Laura.
Thanks, Holden. So my name's Laura Forkham. I'm the president of the Independent Center. Luckily or unluckily for the people on this call, I also have a PhD in consumer psychology. So my research background is really like steeped in the social psychology research that the book is based on. So I had a really good time reading this book because it was an interesting way of like putting back together a lot of ideas that I've thought about in different ways. And I was really excited that Holden picked it. And I'm also excited that Jenna joined us. So Jenna, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Jenna Shrove. I work for the Rebuild Congress initiative, whose mission is really to broaden and diversify the ecosystem of leaders who are aligning on working to advance policy, norms, and narratives needed for American democracy in the 21st century. And I specifically lead our Trust in Institutions team, which is a network of diverse individuals, both politically and every sense of the word, bringing them together to talk about thorny issues and the same types of things. And I actually spent most of my career in business as an economist, so I very much appreciated all of the deep science in this book. So thank you, Holden, for scratching that nerd itch that I so read.
Yeah, I think it's important to add, Laura has a PhD in psychology. I got a 5 on my AP psychology test in high school, so there's not
Basically a
much difference
PhD.
between Laura and myself. So the
Right.
the information gap between all of us is relatively moot. So yeah, this is exciting. So I guess like moving forward with our discussion, initial takeaway, it might be most helpful to start with Laura. Um, what is your kind of takeaway? One thing that really struck me, and especially when we were just chatting over the phone, was the idea that, how foundational and fundamental belonging is to our well-being. He talks about in the book how a lot of times if you don't have this sense of belonging, it'll actually elicit a physiological response.
Mm-hmm.
So your overall health will suffer. I'm curious if like we can speak on that a little bit, what this means for these broader implications about belonging in society, belonging in politics, belonging in our community. And we'll just
Mm-hmm.
kick it off from there.
Yeah, I'm always glad when it's this idea of the importance of belonging is making it into popular press settings because I think researchers are really familiar with this idea, and I want individuals to be because while it was true over evolutionary time that you would die if you did not belong to a group, the research really supports that that is every bit as true today as it was during our prehistoric life. You will die of physical illness at a more rapid rate if you are socially isolated, right? So like this sense of belonging continues to have this just incredible impact on our daily lives. And I think, and on our well-being. So it's not just a matter of like, it feels nice to be connected. It's a matter of it's essential for humans and for a happy life, but also just a normal life to be connected to other people. And we know in the research literature that it is physically painful to be excluded from a group, or to not have that sense of belonging. So I think it's so important for people to be aware of, because I think that's part of why you get such a massively negative response from people when they're excluded or like lack that sense of belonging, like that gives you a sense of how high the stakes are. It's because it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, right? And we're all in the nature of politics, for better or for worse. And, we're supposed to be living in this representative democracy, but, the way the two parties are structured right now is it doesn't feel like they're fine-tuned to meet the needs of the majority of Americans who are somewhere in that kind of nuanced middle. And it starts to feel like the government isn't really fit for purpose, right, Jenna? And like it seems like Congress isn't really working like it's supposed to, like all these different things, like the presidency might not be kind of speaking in a way that most Americans want them to be speaking. Like our institutions kind of seem out of step as well. So I feel like there's a disconnect with the individual as well. So there's kind of multi-layers to this, right?
Absolutely. And I really appreciated this book because it did kind of emphasize that belonging is not just a social nicety. It's really a fundamental physiological need. And like you said, Laura, you can't really differentiate the fight or flight when you feel like you're being attacked if somebody is just challenging your beliefs. So it's the same instinct as if you're facing a bear, as if somebody is saying that they don't agree with you, which is I think very symptomatic of a lot of the political issues that we're seeing right now with polarization. And you can bring it back to that threat of social rejection, right? So we kind of align ourselves with folks who have similar beliefs. This ends up also spilling over into like where we live. We kind of adapt to the folks we live around, or our families, or who we talk to. And so those types of challenging when you go outside of that comfort zone can feel really outsized and important. And that is what we're seeing with polarization, right? And so as we look at a lot of folks being more isolated in this new social media culture too, you don't really have that personal interaction to really unpack like how people are thinking and feeling when you're just responding to them on the internet or like via text. So
yeah, there was that crazy stat that Cohen, I remember he referenced when he said the vast majority of Americans live in just clusters of zip codes where everyone thinks exactly alike. So let's say I'm a Democrat, I identify with the left, like chances are like the majority of my social circle is going to be people on the left. And this is really, really interesting because it makes you realize that there's just not a lot of cross-pollination of ideas. It's like the most, echoing of echo chambers of sorts, which leads to like a stagnation of ideas. There's really not chance for dialogue and discourse and kind of bridging these divides. So it's concerning to say the least, I think. But one of the other things too that was really provocative with Cohen's work was he said that, these environmental conditions and these situational factors aren't absolute, and that we can be activist about them. We can have a positivist and constructivist understanding with them and kind of craft change through how we interact with each other, how we talk with each other, kind of like cultivating these positive situations to kind of foster this cross-cultural divide, right? I don't know if there's more to unpack there.
I thought it was really interesting. He talked about the work of his mentor, Kurt Levin, and said that, or Lewin, sorry, I'm not sure which way it's pronounced, but that he's trying to not control people, but create situations that lead to their flourishing. And that really stood out to me because I think that's part of the work that the IC is interested in doing, right? Is like not like telling you what to do, but how can we let people flourish? And so I think to your point, Holden, like we're not flourishing when we're only talking to the people who agree with us. And you can kind of see this like self-reinforcing effect where it's so threatening and unpleasant to interact with people who disagree with us. So we do less of it. So it's more threatening when you do encounter these people. And like, we're just going to end up in two separate realities, right? Where there's like a red reality and a blue reality. And one of the things I really admire about independence, and like one of the reasons why it's so rewarding to talk to people who are politically independent and who are like, part of the audience of the Independence Center is like, these are people who care more about connecting across difference than they do about like being right or not having their ideas challenged.
So I want to kind of like, this all sounds really, really good. And this is kind of the whole kind of crux of why the IC was started and all of that. But to push back a little bit, I mean, this kind of, I was a little pessimistic as well reading this, and especially some of the comments he just made, Jenna, too, about how, you know, Cohen talks about this us versus them dichotomy that we have, which suggests that it's kind of foundational to our human nature, right? So it's like, the odds are kind of stacked against us, right? So even if we get this group of people that are willing to kind of talk and bridge across, the other group might even still perceive this as a threat. Am I understanding this maybe in the right way, or is it like more complex? I don't know. It's problematic, it seems, if this is kind of something that might be ingrained in us. It's really tough to change.
I think it really has to do with the how, right? So of course, we know that just using like facts and empirical evidence isn't necessarily going to change somebody's mind. And when you go at a conversation trying to make a case as opposed to being empathetic and listen and going in with the intentionality of being curious and intelligence led, I think that people tend to open up more and be more receptive to different dialogues. That's what really honestly attracted me to the bridge building field. So like I mentioned before, I spent about 15 years in business, and then just within the last 2 months joined the bridge building field. But that's something I really appreciate about it is Cohen talks about the situation crafting, right? So you create opportunities, create these dialogues that are really intentional and structured in a way that really emphasizes shared values or things people can come together on, or, you know, co-creating something, collaborating around problem solving to kind of get across that divide, which makes people more receptive to other people's opinions or shared experiences or lived experiences that might look different than theirs. He gives this example of two approaches to folks who were doing some organizing, and one went and stated their opinions and said, there's this bill, we don't like it, how are you going to vote? And the person's like, well, I'm going to vote how I voted, I was going to vote 10 minutes ago. And another group approached it with, hey, how are you thinking about this bill? How do you think about this community? And kind of ask the questions, pull that out of them, and then offered some of their opinions. And he also goes into this this framing of conversation as far as like I think or I feel, as opposed to like this is set in stone, can also create like give people the opportunity to listen a little bit better. So
Yeah,
those types of approaches I think are more important.
It's cool because we're right there with you, and your work that you've been doing with bridge building is because, you know, we like to say with the Independence Center is bottom up, right? Like these people who are politically homeless, it is this crisis of belonging. So they don't feel like they're being listened to. They don't feel like their voice is being heard. They don't have a means or a vehicle to express themselves. Sure, they can vote, but if they're voting for the lesser of two evils or a crummy option, that's not exactly empowering. So we like to say it's like a bottom up kind of approach, but how do we get more bottom-up approaches in a top-down world? I mean, it seems like Washington is just straight from the top, like kind of dictated down. It doesn't feel like there's any real potential to empower the individuals here, kind of incorporate more voices. You know, you're doing the work that you're doing, and then we're trying to do this at the Independence Center by empowering these people. But it's just, it seems like that's kind of the anomaly to like what the status quo is for how politics is kind of dictated, for lack of a better word.
I mean, I thought it was interesting, Jenna, you talked about the situation crafting that is such a focus of the book. And it's a great idea because instead of saying like, I'm going to try and control the outcome, which is to have people be able to connect across difference, right? Then like, instead of trying to get that, I'm going to try and create a situation where people are able to kind of like be the best version of themselves. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting about situation crafting, like another label I might have put on it is what is like agency maximizing for people, right? Because that was the thing that stood out to me about the situation crafting, was like wherever they were trying to get people to connect across difference in these experimental settings, what they were actually doing was putting them in charge of influencing the world around them. And I think that that's where, like, that's what is rewarding to people. That's what makes them feel like they are heard and understood and important and fulfilled. It's the sense that like I can act on the world around me, and have a positive impact on things that are important to me. And you know, it's interesting, like Holden, you're talking about the fact that like, are we just destined to do this sort of like, you know, stick with our own group and reject the other group? But I think what this research is showing really consistently across like 50 years of research, maybe even 60, is that there are certain things that make us more inclined to like push ourselves away from other groups, right? And there are things that make it more possible for us to connect with them. And so we can kind of look at our political life and say, like, what do we need to do to make it so that people can reach across difference? And so, like, the more you have this sort of threatening to yourself, right? Like, the more you're going to be focused on your group and showing the other groups wrong. But like there are things that we can do that aren't that challenging to make people feel like it's almost like they've reconnected to their sense of self, and because of that they're able to tolerate listening to a different viewpoint, which is not to say like they need to agree. And I think that's one of the interesting things about independents, is that they don't, I think independents in particular are not really likely to look at other people who disagree and say, you need to agree with me. Instead, they want to say, like, where's the common ground? Like, what do we agree on? You know, and that's like really unusual, I think, in politics right now. And that's what we're trying. That's really what the IC is focused on, is like, how do we get a politics that is less focused on division and sort of that protective nature that makes us push away other groups.
Yeah, I mean, our colleague Jenna Adam Brandon would always kind of quote Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, the idea of like, if you build it, they will come. This idea that it's like, if you give them an alternative or a means to kind of express themselves and engage in politics in this constructive way, then these other changes can start to kind of compound upon one another. It seems really, really tricky and tough though, given, you know, social media, just negative partisanship, because he talks about how like negativity and the negative news cycle is a lot trendier. You know, it generates clicks, it generates reactions, it's sensationalist, you know, in part because of these, you know, these factors that we have in us that maybe kind of fixates on negativity a bit higher. It seems to be a stronger kind of driver than a positivist kind of rosy outlook. You know, I mean, this negative partisanship and this negativity, it seems like it kind of undermines a lot of this sort of stuff, doesn't it? I mean, if you have alternatives to it, then maybe we can kind of work around that. But if the market's so saturated with this and that's what sells, you know, that's tricky and that's tough.
Yeah, what is the term? It's called like rage entrepreneurialism or something like that.
I've never heard that. That's really good.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up and send it to you. But it's really just communicating that fear, rage, things that elicit strong emotions are what sell, which is why you see things on social media or in media, legacy media, wherever, being more and more extreme, I guess, if you will, because that is what gets attention. That's what it gets clicks and likes and those types of things. But to answer your question, Holden, I think it really has to start in like communities, right? And in one-on-one conversations that you're having with different people. And it's going to take a level of civility that I don't know that we're there yet, but I'd love to see us get there. And something that Cohen talks about is these like self-affirmation. So one, getting really clear about your values and approaching conversations, understanding that helps you consider others might have different values and have different lived experiences that have informed those. But then also in conversation, these kind of like micro, like uplifting of like, oh yeah, you know, you're entitled to have your opinions. I forget what he calls them, like micro affirmations of their opinions, and being able to acknowledge that in a conversation makes them more comfortable to express those, therefore more open to yours. And sometimes you can get at that by just asking questions. Like I've been in situations, I've been in many situations, nobody would actually know what my political beliefs are, because I'm just like, tell me about yours. How did you get there? What was your childhood experience like? Like, help me understand from your perspective how you're looking at this thing. And then maybe, like we've mentioned, there's something, a shared value or a shared perspective that we can then pull that thread.
Yeah, I think the one story that he told about his roommate when he was a freshman at Harvard was really kind of striking. So his freshman roommate was really conservative and just anti-gay rights, anti-gay marriage, and like Cohen would say that he would just find himself just screaming and yelling at this person. It would start as like a really just mundane evening, and by the end of it, they would just be absolutely just yelling at each other and causing a fiasco. But through everyday interactions, his roommate started to have like he changed his views on things, and it happened slowly, but then it kind of seemed like it kind of accelerated. And it's interesting because this suggests that in a lot of ways change has to happen organically. You know, like you can't really just win, or like you're not, whenever you're like getting an argument with someone over politics, you always have to be like, what can I say that will change your mind? Because usually there's going to be nothing that will make them change their mind. They have to get there on their own. So it's empowering to the individual, and we have to have that understanding about it, that when we're talking about politics, there might just be an impasse here at this moment in time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this impasse will persist, and things can change, situations can change, like he said, like you can situation craft or like maybe have a wise intervention, but it's possible for it to move, but you just can't expect someone to get from point B to point A in just like one staunch leap. And like you said too, you can maybe guide someone and kind of have this open discussion with them, but you can't just nudge them there. And I feel like the two parties right now are just, you know, they're just bludgeoning one another with just like rhetorical extremes and just like really kind of you know, tough policy positions that they know the other side will never get to. And then they look like, well, how can you never agree on this? And it's because they're not giving one another anything to work with. And I think that's this fundamental misunderstanding that they're not there, nor will they expect to be. But that doesn't mean there's not overlap in other places or chances to open up discussion through other avenues and other means, correct?
Yeah, and I wanted to say too, I don't think that Cohen says it in exactly these words in the book, but talking about the example of Hank, the way I would summarize that, what happened there is that like people don't change because of information or facts, they change through relationships and social connection. So, you know, people's views on same-sex marriage changed really rapidly across the United States over the period of like, you know, what's been measured, I think is like the 70s to the present day. They changed incredibly rapidly. And I don't think it was because there were campaigns out there saying like same-sex marriage is okay. I think it's because increasingly people knew other people who were in same-sex relationships. And one of the things to me that's like so important to take away is that there's no such thing. I say this all the time. There's no such thing as persuasion. You can't convince people to adopt your views. All you can do is remain connected to them. And I think especially where we're in this cultural moment where people are talking about like going no contact with people that they disagree with or cutting off relationships that people disagree with, to me, that's terrible, because it's like, well, now you've lost your ability to continue to influence them. And you know, I think that people change through relationships. I don't think they change because of facts. They change because of the other people they're connected with. And it's kind of like Jenna and Holden, like what you're both saying is like, if you can have conversations where the relationship is more important than the outcome, than like you coming around to my point of view, I think that's where people have space to change and maybe like think a little bit differently, right? Because like going back to this idea of belonging, if belonging is about survival and relationships are about survival, then like reinforcing the idea of the relationship and the safety of the relationship actually would give people the space to listen to some contrary information.
Agreed. And Cohen talks a lot about the fundamental attribution error, right? So
yes. Yeah.
the sentiment that, because because I don't agree with this belief, you are there for inherently bad. And I feel like that permeates our politics. And so long as we continue to vilify the other side instead of listen to and try and understand, I don't think it really is hard to move forward. And that's why I'm really excited about the work you all are doing, because I think there's this just core center of folks who are just really pragmatic and get that. But they're just not as vocal. And so they don't get picked up in the cycle of news. They don't get in your feeds because it's not as exciting to watch a really good civil conversation as it is to see somebody scream at somebody on the street. Or so I feel like until we solve that problem, I don't know where we go.
It's interesting. Laura just helped run a focus group in Michigan, and like kind of one of the biggest takeaways that we got from the participants was they all were like, really, like we all kind of agree on the big things. And we tend to pit like the two parties as just radically opposed to one another. But it was actually interesting in that a lot of people in 2016 who supported Bernie Sanders ended up flipping to Donald Trump. Now, granted, there's more nuance there because we're talking about kind of different blends of populism. But this kind of suggests that, politics isn't just in this straight line. It's kind of more circular, and like there's ways to kind of navigate around this. So if you're just kind of cutting someone off, like there's a good chance that they probably agree on you on most things. And there's people that we'll work with that are in the independent space that we probably won't agree with on every issue, say like regulation of tech, just to name a random issue. But like we'll agree with on immigration, or we'll agree with on something else. And I think the nature of politics right now is so just inherently zero sum that one group has to succeed at the expense of the other group when it's supposed to be collaborative and kind of the most raw understanding of it. You're supposed to hash things out. It's supposed to be kind of messy at times, but that's the nature of compromise and working together with one another. And it just seems like we've lost that. And I don't know if that stems from the two parties, if that stems from the media, if that stems from the electorate, but it doesn't seem like it's stemming from the electorate. The electorate is just kind of a symptom of it. It seems like there's this breakdown where we've lost this idea that this is how government is supposed to work. And you don't want to have someone think, in the exact same way that you think, that's how you get, a Politburo in China or whatever have you. So disagreements are good. They're actually really healthy for democracy.
Yeah. Does your organization kind of think through things, Jenna, in that way of like, how do we encourage more debate, or what's kind of the chicken and the egg of like trust versus debate and collaboration?
Absolutely. It's like compromise is a bad word now, whereas before, like it's what was expected of folks. But I think that's part of what has changed, right? Is political incentives have changed, and what some of the electorate expects of their representatives is to fight for them and not give way on different issues. So there are myriad of reasons this could be, from everything from increased transparency, like things like C-SPAN make it more performative than it is constructive dialogue, and doesn't leave a lot of room for kind of that negotiation that typically happens. And there's a whole myriad of things we could talk about as far as what could be contributing to those incentives. But yeah, that is something we in our dialogues talk about a lot, is like, where is this disconnect? Why does it feel like, at least at this time, that it's so almost like sports parties, like you have to be wearing your red jersey, or you only
Isn't it
have
weird?
to be wearing
Bizarre.
your blue jersey. And it's almost like they used to think about each other as institutions, like, okay, the House versus the Senate versus the executive branch, but now they think each other as a team, like politically, and that has exacerbated some of these issues. So that, and there's a lot of different things around like money in politics. You could talk about elections and how in particular primaries are run and those types of things too, but that gets really weedy really quick.
It's interesting because right after the election, we did a round of polling where we polled independents, we polled Republicans, we polled Democrats. And like it was really, really interesting. And this polling was consistent with other outlets and things that conducted their own polling. But we found that, a vast majority of Democrats wanted to see this administration succeed. And these are just Americans who answered polling. And I mean, the whole idea is like, I mean, when Donald Trump got elected in 2016, we were like, I hope he's a really good president. When Joe Biden got elected, I was like, I hope he's a really good president. When Trump got, I hope that's how it's supposed to be. And I think most people view that because it's like, if the economy's good, if the world is safe, if there are jobs, if I don't get killed at the pump, like it doesn't matter if he's an R or a D, like that's a good thing for me. But like you said, we tend to have this whole idea about like it's a sports team now. It's like, fealty to a party is kind of the ultimate sort of thing you're going for, where it's like if you step out of line once, and Cohen talks about this, then you lose that group identity and you have this fear, which he talks about, of being ostracized and kind of cast out. And then you're in the middle, like all of us are somewhere in the middle, and hence you have no other means to kind of tether your identity to. So it's problematic.
That's interesting, Jenna. You were using the metaphor of a sports team, and like that actually is, I think, really informative because it's like, well, only one team can win, and ultimately we only care about winning. So is there another metaphor that you think would be more productive, or like, do you guys use one in your work that to kind of give people, I don't know, Holden, maybe you have an idea about this too. Like, what would be a more productive metaphor?
That's a really good question. We don't use this in our dialogues, but this is what I will say personally, is like a symphony, right? You all have your different roles. You're all playing different instruments, and you need to be coming together to make like one unit song. And that's how I see it, especially with the just the infrastructure within Congress too. Like there are so many things wanting as far as, the role of the rank and file and how much power leadership has and those types of things. But at the end of the day, and we're also missing like real experts. We have a lot of generalists, but not like real experts. So in my mind, it should be this melody of folks kind of playing their roles and coming together to create something beautiful and better than existed before.
I was picturing like a sandcastle, right? Like you need someone to go grab a shovel, and then like someone is on the bucket, and then like the tide's coming in, so someone like runs to kind of like dig a trench to keep the tide from washing the sandcastle. So it's like everyone kind of steps up as needed and contributes in a way that might be their strength or their benefit for the collective, I don't want to use that word recklessly, but the broader collective goal, right? I don't know. Symphony works really well too, but my head was just like beach. Like, I don't know why.
Because that's where we all want to be today.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that too, because both of those metaphors, because it's like, well, if everybody was in lockstep, right, and doing the same thing, it'd be a boring symphony and the sandcastle would never be built, right? And so it's like, if we look at the world around us as like, we need everybody to be in perfect agreement with us, like that's just a very impoverished world, right? Like we benefit from having a diversity of opinions and experiences. And so, yeah, I like both of those a lot better.
Yeah, it's interesting because Cohen was talking about, a lot of diversity initiatives and things like that. And, with this current administration, it seems like that's kind of one of the things that they're kind of targeting politically or kind of seeking to kind of roll back, is a lot of the diversity talk, and like acting like diversity isn't really a good thing. But it was cool because like Cohen was talking about like with the diversity trainings and things that like Starbucks was doing and stuff. He's like, this doesn't mean that these are totally ineffective. There's a chance that we can have a more constructive way to talk about this sort of stuff, but it's just been politicized. So, but it's like what you're saying. It's like, I mean, more voices and more ideas and all of these sorts of things. That's a really, really good thing. It's this isn't a bad thing. But it seems right now, it seems to be like this interest in just kind of like getting everyone kind of on the same page, which there's a benefit of that too, to an extent. But to act like you can't have both is seems to be contradictory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laura, there was also the thing you mentioned too, talking about prioritizing relationships. And I know we were talking about this on the phone briefly, but Cohen talks about it a little bit as well, where when you don't have this sense of belonging, people will be pushed to further and further ends of the spectrum to kind of
Hmm.
find that sense, right? That's why you're seeing a lot of the emergence of, the quote unquote manosphere on the right
Hmm.
with people like Andrew Tate, and like you'll see people kind of on the left. Can you talk more about like how sometimes like when you don't have this sense of belonging, or what your thoughts are, like how this leads to maybe kind of this extremization of thinking
Hmm.
and of kind of groups? Because he talks about kind of alt-right groups here. He
Hmm.
talked about the guy who was like a Klansman and kind of ultimately changed his way, which is always interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of this drive to have a sense of belonging is to want to be approved and accepted by a group of people. And, you'll find something, right? Like you'll find some group that will have you, because that's such an important need we have. And so I think the question is like, well, what happens to people who are ostracized is like they're gonna find appeal in groups that maybe aren't really healthy places for them, like the Ku Klux Klan example that they talk about at the beginning of the book. And so what was really interesting to me in that example was, he describes how this member of the KKK ended up on a panel of experts, or not panel of experts, a panel of community members who were going to talk about school desegregation. And the whoever was running the group had the incredible wisdom to say to this guy, like, your honesty is really important to us. Even when he was expressing ideas that were like, you know, deeply opposed to the idea of integration, of school integration, he was still, the group moderator was still able to say like, thank you for being so honest. And so it's funny because I think like, especially, as we sort of are more and more used to like online spaces and spaces where no one disagrees with us and cutting off people who disagree with us, like that impulse to look at somebody that you have some real concerns about and say like, you're still welcome. You still matter to me. And here are the things about you that I really admire. Like that's so hard. um, but like there's really nothing else we can do that works. And I wish we could like all get away from the idea that you can just browbeat somebody into looking at the world the way that you do, which is so much of our political discourse right now.
I That's why I loved his notion of like trying on different identities. So you try and find some mutual ground over things like parents. People who are parents can kind of
Mm-hmm.
bond over what it means to be a parent, and you can kind of try on values and perspectives in that way. But I also agree that in this environment, it is really hard to find those communities and then be comfortable kind of extending beyond that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think social media both can help and hinder in that way. And we've seen that, right? We've seen some of the benefits of social media, people who might not be geographically near somebody who has a similar experience or values as they are, can connect to people all over the world. I say like cancer survivors or like
Mm-hmm.
people who are going through grief or those types of things. But then you can also find, you know, the bad sides of it, where it's like you get absorbed in these worlds where folks who don't necessarily have opinions or they're based on fact are kind
Yeah.
of in your echo chamber constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jen, I was going to ask where you see this trend going, because I mean, one of the things you're hearing, since COVID-19 and the lockdowns, is there's been kind of this increasing sense of alienation. I mean, Laura and I work remote, so like we're not interacting in an office every day, you know, I'm not commuting on the metro. A lot of my day is just kind of like sitting at my laptop and kind of talking on Teams. And it seems like we're in this increasingly paradoxical world where we're more isolated, but we're also connected in different ways. You know, do you see these trends kind of continuing, or like, because I mean, they often say that like chatting online is no replacement for human interaction. And there's a degree of that in truth, but I also wonder if that doesn't get at the full picture.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of, we've seen and experienced, and there's a lot of learning now around kind of some of those negative social effects of either social media or being isolated. And there are a lot of folks who are coming out with different ways to adapt to that. I think what gives me hope and is exciting to me are kind of these experiences I'm seeing actually through social media of folks putting together like IRL experiences, like come to a place and just read a book. We don't even have to talk. We can just read a book together. These silent book clubs are really exciting to me. I don't know why, but probably because I just want to be a part of one. Like people who are really trying to get back to in-person experiences based on the lessons and the feelings we've had over the last, 5+ years after COVID, or when COVID started. I think it's getting better, and I think folks are really kind of looking for that. But if we're talking about like that change is going to take a long time, right? So how do we really use the frameworks we have or the environment we have right now to try and get to folks? So like you all have a social media presence. You're trying to get in front of folks like, hey, we're here. We have conversations. We don't like, we're open to everybody. Like we're open to dialogue, not just partisan views. And I think I've seen an uptick in those types of accounts, which I really appreciate, like builders or like Bridge USA and those types of organizations and movements that are happening that are really looking at one, in-person interaction, and two, how do we increase civil dialogue and how do we demonstrate and show civil dialogue? Because we're not, again, our fear-mongering feeds are showing us being argumentative. How do we get the algorithm to pick up more on these positive interactions?
It's actually interesting. We have a tool in a program that we run at the Independence Center called the Marketplace of Ideas, which is kind of in our data science sort of shop. And what we do, I say we, but this is our colleague does, is he employs the proprietary AI model, which will actually like pick up on just streams and streams and streams of discussions and policy conversations that are going on Reddit, which like I always thought Reddit was one of those places where you just get in like really crazy weeds of just the most random, like if you have a question someone's posted about it on Reddit, which like makes it just this treasure trove of information. But what we've been doing is we've been trying to analyze kind of what's been going on in the Reddit threads, and it will tell us what's trending, what's an energizing topic, what is no longer as popular. And like it's really striking because the level of discussion that's going on Reddit and online is pretty high quality content. Like it's a lot more, highbrow than you would previously like kind of accept. Like I said, I kind of discredit it at first glance, but when you're looking through some of the stuff, it's really, really interesting. So even in these digital spaces, people are quick to dismiss it, but I just think this is kind of the new nature of this dynamic. This is just kind of what civil society looks like now in 2025. So there might be potential to bridge build in the digital sphere. There might be places to kind of expand your event horizon per se by meeting someone who, might think completely differently than you. And you have, it's weird because you have this sense of protection because you're not, directly engaging with them. So that can be a good or a bad thing. That, remains to be seen. I'm not want to make a normative statement on whether that's good or bad, but it has the potential for both. So that's kind of one interesting thing that we've been learning is it's like, yeah, these high level discussions are like going on right now. And just, just people in their free time are talking about these things and engaging with these ideas.
I mean, I think that too speaks to the importance of norms. Jenna, I don't know if any of the work that you guys do is around shaping norms, but, in these Reddit communities that are focused on policy and politics, there's a strong norm of having a civil conversation, right? And like talking about ideas and critiquing ideas in a way that's thoughtful instead of flaming people. And it's really incredible the extent to which like the people we're connected to shape our behavior. They shape our understanding of the world around us, like literally how we perceive the world around us. And so I think that's really important to be aware of too, because it's like, you know, there's a lot of research about like things like all kinds of health research, right? That says that like if your friends or your social network drink a lot, you will drink a lot. If they smoke, you will smoke. If they are sedentary and eat unhealthy diets, that's what you'll do. So it's like those are norms, those are acting on us. And if we're not aware of the potential for those group norms to shape us, I think we can end up acting in ways that maybe are not aligned with our values. And it's like insidious. It happens without you noticing. And so I just think like that's a really good example of a norm where you could join a Reddit community to talk about politics and like really change your behavior in a positive way. You could join another group and change it in a negative way. So Jenna, do you guys think about norms at all in the work you do?
Absolutely. And we think about it less on the individual or community level and more on the societal and government level. So talking about, you know, my favorite analogy is like the rules of the game. Like I don't know what the rules of the game are anymore. And so, and we've seen over the past few years just this chipping away at norms and what is normal for civil society. So things like, you know, being respectful of your fellow politicians is not a thing anymore. It's probably there used to be a standard for folks in office, right? And now you see not only, you know, the pundits kind of going after each other, you see official government accounts attacking the other party, and this is true of both parties. This is not true. This is not like only one party, and it's been like that. And I've just watched that degradation of norms and civility over the last few years, thinking to myself, what is happening? Like, how are we getting here? But that kind of goes back to the just the notion of like, this is what sells, this is what gets clicks, and this is what gets attention, and this is what gets you elected now at the end of the day. So we're kind of eating our own like meal because we're the ones who are putting them into office. So we talk a lot about like, okay, if we're in this moment of like deconstruction, what should civil norms, what should government look like, what should these things look like, what should the rules of the road be in the 21st century? We're almost 250 years old as a country. Like what the founding fathers put into the Constitution still like remains hard and fast, but it can look a lot different because the world looks a lot different. So we talk a lot about, okay, what should we be agreeing on are the rules of the road? And can we stick to things like political adversaries shouldn't be demonizing each other? Can we stick to things like the role of government is to get things done? Like, and what does that mean? And what does that mean like across parties? And so that constitutes a lot of our conversations. You know, I'm hopeful that we can be productive in that sense, but it's just a very interesting time to be having these conversations as well.
It's interesting. I mean, you'll hear people on both sides of the party who will kind of defend this rhetoric and this, you know, name calling and things like that. And they'll be like, well, actions matter more than words. And it's like, well, yes, actions do matter more than words, but to totally discard the fact that words matter, and especially from elected officials, I mean, like, I'm sorry, but there's an asymmetry here. Like what the president says matters a lot more than like what I spout, you know, and that's not to be, you know, extremist here, but that's just kind of a fact of how it is. And like chipping away at these norms, it happens slowly, it seems, and you don't really realize it until suddenly you're in a situation like where we are now, and you're like, oh my gosh, like anything on the news is going to be something so negative, or something that's coming out of the politician's mouth is going to be kind of borderline slander, or things like this. And it's just, I don't know how we got here, besides it just happened so kind of slowly and incrementally till suddenly now it's like, oh gosh.
So you know what? That reminds me, I was talking to somebody recently who runs a group called Majority in the Middle, which is looks at it's focused on state government in Minnesota. And she was talking about the importance of like praising things that you want to see, like recognizing and praising. And I think it's really hard to talk to elected officials and say, like, stop being a jerk, right? Like, stop talking to people like that. But instead, to find even rare examples of like, hey, I heard what you said, and I know that must have been hard to be civil under those circumstances. And I just want to say, like, I really applaud you, or like, I really appreciate that you do that. So that was her like, one of the things that she does is she reaches out to compliment people for upholding a better standard. And I think like that's one of the few tools available to us to actually get the norms to shift from where they are right now.
Yeah, maybe like a congressional sticker chart of sorts.
Oh
Like
yeah,
you're
like
potty
gold
training your
stars.
congressman. Just an idea, guys.
I love that idea, and I think that's absolutely right, Laura. This actually specific example came up in a recent conversation that I was having, and somebody pushed back and said sometimes that other person doesn't want you to praise them, because then it could look to their constituents like, you were doing something wrong.
Oh
I
gosh.
was like, is that where we're at?
Seems
that just saying like, thank you for standing up for, I don't know, childcare tax credit or something like that,
right,
is still controversial because you're looking at like you're supporting the other side. That's disappointing.
Yeah, it was crazy, right? Like when they were talking about if they would frame an issue to a Palestinian and they would be like, this is a Palestinian position, then they would support it. But if they told them it was an Israeli position, but it was actually a Palestinian position, they wouldn't support it at all. It's just like, how fragmented is our thinking right now that it's like, the C word, compromise, is such a dirty word. Like, God forbid.
That's so much of our political discourse right now, and our policy discourse is like, I need to know who came up with this idea in order to know if I agree with it or not. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the IC and our colleagues at the IC is that they take ideas seriously, and they will make a good faith critique of them, instead of just saying like, this is a dumb bill, or like, this is, there they go again, right? With whichever party is doing it. And I think I wish more people would sort of engage with the text of legislation, or like the philosophy behind a policy, and say, well, I disagree with this because I think that it, right, like is giving too much power to the state, or I disagree with this because I think it's not based in principles of fairness and equity. And have like a real conversation, instead of just being like, well, this is, getting back to the fundamental attribution error, right? Like, oh, this is just you guys being immoral. This is just you guys being dumb.
And I think what concerns me the most about that type of thing is just a lack of critical thinking. Like, do you know, if you're aware of your own values and you can read a text and think to yourself, like, does this align with those or not, even if it's, aligned with your party or not. So, and I know what's disappointing to me is the perception of Congress and people in DC from those outside of it is that this is the way things are. And this how everybody, going back to fundamental attribution error, like they're all the same. And it's like, no, there are some really great people here who are doing amazing things and want to do amazing things, but the system is such that right now that it's just impossible. And so how do we create, or how do we help improve that system so that more voices can contribute? So I appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, we're basically at time, guys. So one more question for both of you guys to answer is like, what is like your one big takeaway, or like, why should we feel good about this. Like, it's not all doom and gloom. Like, I know it's like a negative Nancy about human nature a little bit earlier, whatever have you. Like, what's the big idea? Like, moving forward, like, what do you guys think?
Laura,
Do you want to start, Jenna? Oh, I can start. So I think one of the things that that most stood out to me and made me most optimistic is just that like our sense of belonging can make us behave in or a need for belonging, right? Can make us behave in ways that are really negative, but also really positive, right? Like people in a community of others where they feel like safe and secure and like they're able to be themselves and like they're being asked to rise to a higher standard of behavior, like people can achieve incredible things collaboratively. So like there's so much possibility. And I think I keep meeting people in the work I do for the Independence Center who are part of this effort to say like, hey, we can let's like push ourselves to do better instead of just critiquing, right? So I feel like the book is sort of like, well, yeah, here's how it can go badly, but also like look at all the things that are available to us. So that's what makes me hopeful.
Yeah, just to build off of that, I think I hope this gets picked up and talked a lot about, because I think the framework of being curious and inquisitive and asking questions is so important. And I think if we can diffuse that more into the world, like the world will be so much better place, like you were talking about. And so it gives me hope that one, this is in the, not just the like the atmosphere of intellectuals, but I see it also popping up on social media and in conversations online. And I'm like, yes, please, can we all move in this direction about being more inquisitive, being more open, and just, being more civil.
Yeah, Jenna, I'm with you. One of the good pieces of advice that a lot of people like to kind of say is be curious but not judgmental. And I think that was kind of one of the biggest takeaways that I got from Cohen is like, yeah, the way the current ecosystem is structured right now is problematic and it leads to all of these different things. And we have a tendency to judge and stereotype and do these things, but they're really, really small changes that we can all make in our everyday lives that we can do. We can change how we think about things. We can change how we ask questions and how we engage with people who might be different than us. And in doing that, you can lead to bigger changes. And at times when we're trying to bridge this gap between Republicans and Democrats or talk to the politically homeless, it feels like we're trying to boil the ocean at times. And that can be really, really overwhelming. But change starts with the individual, and it's all these really, really small things that you can do that can just have this really, really big lasting impact. And like Laura said too, it's like if you can unlock this sort of sense of belonging, human flourishing, the potential for that is kind of, boundless in a lot of ways. And it can touch lots of different areas that people don't even really expect. So
yeah,
there's a rosy way
that's a
to end
great
it.
summary.
Super
Yeah.
good. So,
Yeah.
well, thanks for
And
joining,
hey,
guys.
you can belong to the Independence Center. Like if you, we don't care
That's
what your
right.
party is. We
There's
don't
our
have a
pitch.
litmus test.
We join
You
the
can
Independence
belong with
Center
us.
and we'll rebuild Congress with Jenna.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, thanks, guys. This was awesome. This is a really good discussion. So
Yeah.
thanks for
Thank
joining.
you.
Okay,
This
so
is
now I'm
great.
just gonna like stop the recording and then that'll get edited out. Let's see. Stop recording.